Hi all, welcome to your first lecture dumping into the world of computer science. So previously up to this point we had been more focused on biology and some bioinformatics tools like NCBI, BLAST, our alignment tools, that kind of thing. Now we're going to be jumping into some basic programming skills and terminology. So these slides are actually taken from another course that I have taught before called CMPT 140. And CMPT 140 is like our very intro into programming in the department at the University of Saskatchewan for students who have never done any kind of programming before. So if you go onto the YouTube page, you will see some videos from that class. You can watch through those if you want extra explanation, or maybe 2 years ago, Kim, explaining those things again to you. Feel free to take a look at those. Ignore anything that's specifically about the programming environment that we were using for that class, because we'll use a slightly different one for this class. These lectures are going to be different than what we have done so far in the class. So for all of our computer science-esque lectures, you are expected to do a short pre-read before jumping into the video and the lecture exercises that will be in the slide. So the pre-reading is from a textbook that was purpose-made by one of the profs in the Department of Computer Science for the Intro to Programming courses. So it's very tailored to the information we want you to know, to the exercises that you'll see in the slides or in assignments or on exams, that kind of thing. It's free, which is a huge bonus, and it is really, really well done. So if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to pause the video, go and read those. I think they're 5 pages for this one to start off with. Get an understanding of what we're talking about, because these slides do very limited overview of the material that was in the textbook. We expect you to kind of read that and understand that on your own. Of course, ask questions in the discussion boards if you have questions about it. But then the lecture actually focuses on active learning with that information. So taking what we learned about in that textbook readings and applying them to problems that we would see in assignments, in labs, in exams, those kinds of things. So that's what we'll be focusing on more. As I mentioned, I have taught this material before for CMPT 140. So for lectures where we're not using the specific programming environment for CMPT 140, instead of re-recording those lectures, you'll likely just see on the screen, instead of where it says BINF 151, it'll say CMPT 140. And that's because we go over the same information. It's, like I mentioned, our intro to programming and computer science for people who don't have programming experience, kind of what we expect the same level of programming experience to be at in this course. And we want you to gain some of that programming experience, since it is really important for bioinformatics. So you'll get a little taste of it. You won't get as much as what we would cover in CMPT 140, but we'll give you some of the basics to get started. So you'll have an idea of like what an algorithm is, how do we make up some simple programs and run them, what are some common kind of tools that we use in programs, that kind of thing. So by no means will give you like expert level computer science, but just a taste of what it is in case you want to go further in that area, or if you are doing bioinformatics in like a research lab in the future, you're a little better prepared to handle some of the other tools that would require you to run them, that are just kind of more basic programs that don't have our beautiful 90s UIs that I'm sure you all love so much. All right, well, we'll dive into this right now. So in the textbook, we talked about what this weird word algorithms is. So I know I have used this in this class so far, and I am so sorry that I have used it before we actually explained what it was. So an algorithm is a word that is really commonly used in computer science, but we can find examples of it all throughout our lives, not just when we're talking about computers and programming. It's really just an ordered set of actions that are going to solve a problem. So a problem has to exist for an algorithm to exist, and then actions have to meet specific criteria for them to be valid actions that are a part of an algorithm. We'll get into more of that on the next slide. But in the textbook, we gave some pretty good examples of things that you might see in your everyday life that would be examples of algorithms. So the pictured instructions that you would get with a Lego kit, where you take these blocks that you're given and the instructions tell you how to put those things together in order to create something at the end of it. Oh, I should have got my Lego that I have in my house, and I could have shown you what I've made recently with Lego. It's unsurprisingly a little French bulldog in Lego. I wonder why. Another great example is recipes. So recipes have typically lists of ingredients and then instructions for how you can take those ingredients to create something else, whether that's bread, whether that's a cake, you name it. A recipe is a great example of all of that. But both of those things have very distinct actions within them. And in the textbook, we talked about how actions within algorithms have to meet these 3 different criteria in order for them to be valid actions in an algorithm. So, quick pulse check for yourself before I explain what they are. Do you remember from your readings what these 3 different things mean? That's a great question for a multiple choice on a midterm or a final exam. Don't know why I would say that. Anyways, so an action has to have all 3. If even just one is missing, then it's not a valid action for an algorithm by the definition that we use for algorithms. How many times can I say algorithms in one sentence? So what we're saying here is an action would need to be imperative, which means it's an actual command to do something. So it's not a question. It's not just the sky is blue. It's actually gray right now, but it's an actual command. It's go to the kitchen, go, or open NCBI, an actual command to do something. It also has to be feasible. So the intended recipient of the algorithm needs to be able to do it. This can mean different things depending on who that recipient is. If the recipient is a human, like it would be for, say, a recipe or maybe a Lego kit, it would have to be feasible actions or commands for a human to do. If it's for a computer, it needs to be feasible actions or commands for a computer to do. We can't tell the computer to go to the kitchen, at least not yet. It also needs to be self-explanatory. So there needs to be enough detail in that action for the person or the computer or whoever the audience is that is intended to actually go and do it. So sometimes we can be a little bit too vague, then that would mean it's not actually an action because the intended recipient doesn't have enough information to go and execute what they're supposed to do. So we have, for this first exercise, a whole bunch of actions listed below, and we want to know if they're appropriate for an adult human or a computer. Now, if you want to, you can pause and you can try to go through and say, what is the answer for all of these things? We also have all of the answers listed out with more detailed explanations in the lecture exercise solutions that you'll find in the same place where you found this video on the Canvas page. So the very first question here, is it appropriate for an adult human if we said, are these 2 proteins orthologs? And now a big hint here is that this statement ends with a question mark. And as I just mentioned in the previous slide, a question mark is not a command to do something, which means that this is violating the imperative requirement for actions in algorithms. So it's actually not appropriate for either an adult human or a computer because it's not even an action to begin with. The next one here, go swimming in the pool. Is it appropriate for an adult human? Probably yes. The adult human might have feelings about whether or not they want to go swimming in the pool, but that's imperative. That's telling us to do something. It is generally feasible. Most of us can go swimming in a pool. I guess there's probably a caveat there that some people may not know how to swim, so we might have to evaluate who the intended audience is for that one. And then it's also specific enough. So that last one's self-explanatory. Go swimming in pool. There's enough details for us to actually execute that. But for computers, completely not appropriate. I want to say irrational, but it's not irrational. That's probably the wrong word for it. Computers can't swim. So they can't go swimming in a pool. So it's not an appropriate action. It's not feasible for that audience if the audience was a computer. Read data from the NCBI database. So for a computer, pretty reasonable. It knows what the NCBI database is, or we can provide that as an input, and it knows how to read data from that. For an adult human, the answer in the slides or in the PDF is like, it's unreasonable for humans because we don't have a built-in NCBI database is what we say in there. But I'm going to take it a step further and say, okay, even if we said we had a computer for the human, we could give it the NCBI website, and we wanted it to read all the data, I still think it's infeasible to expect one person to read all of the data from NCBI and do what with it? It would be my question. I don't feel like I would retain any of that information, so maybe I'm just projecting, but that would be another reason my brain would go to why that would be infeasible for an adult human. For D, the action is compute the sum of 5 and 2. That is a very imperative action. Whoopsie. It is feasible for both a human and a computer to do, and it is self-explanatory, so it would be a valid, appropriate action for both. And then E, we have search for the most relevant gene on the internet. That is imperative. It's telling us to do something. Feasible question mark, but the reason it's a question mark for me is because it's not self-explanatory enough. What does the most relevant gene actually mean? Unless we have some definition of that, it's not appropriate for an adult human or a computer, because how would we actually figure that out? If we had more instructions, sure, maybe we could make the argument that it is feasible, because it is self-explanatory. We've narrowed down that scope a bit, but as it currently stands, not really appropriate for either. All right, so our next exercise that we're going to do is write an algorithm for searching the human hemoglobin protein. Now, we have answers to all of these in the lecture exercise solutions. You can go in there and take a look at it. What I will say for all of those is that whenever we're talking about algorithms, and even when we're talking about programming, there is so many different ways to do things. So if you're coming up with an answer that is slightly different, it's not that it's wrong, it's just different. And if you want someone to take a look at it and say, hey, does this make sense for this exercise or whatever, post about it in the discussion boards under course questions. I'm happy to take a look at it. I'm sure the peers in the class would also be happy to take a look at it and put their 2 cents in. So I will write up my algorithm for searching the human hemoglobin protein. It might be slightly different than what's in the solutions, and it might be slightly different than yours, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. The goal here is that we're writing a list of steps, which when executed from the top of the list to the bottom of the list, will achieve the goal or solve the problem of, we'll actually be able to search for this human hemoglobin protein. So again, we're going to be writing actions, starting off at the top. What's the very first thing we're going to do? And those actions all need to be imperative, feasible, and self-explanatory. So if I was tasked with this and I was saying, okay, how would I explain to somebody else how to search for the human hemoglobin protein? I would probably say something like, open NCBI website, and then I would probably give the URL. I don't have it off the top of my head, so I'm just going to leave it like that for now. We can plop in the URL there. Once we're at the NCBI website, the next thing we're going to do is going to either search or we're going to filter it to search for information in a specific database, if you remember back from a few lectures ago. So since we're searching for a protein, we would likely want to take that drop-down menu and select the protein database. So I'm going to then tell whoever the audience of this is to select the protein database from, oh, and I spelt it wrong, of course. Have I told y'all how bad I am at spelling? From the drop-down menu beside the search bar. And of course, I have to move this over, and I've spelt another thing wrong. There we go. So I'm filtering for that protein database. Once I have that, I'm gonna put type human hemoglobin in the search bar and press search. So that will start the search, and we could actually probably even split these up into two actions. Whenever we put an and in there, usually that means we could likely put them into two separate things. It's really common for us as humans to like connect things together that are kind of related. But when it comes to actions, you want them to kind of be do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Not do this and this and this, and then this and this and this, and all of these complicated things. Keep it really simple and to the point. So whatever I'm looking at my results here of what I've written up, if I see ands, I kind of know in my brain, hey, that's probably something I should just delete and put on a new line. So if we execute all of these different things, what we'll end up doing is, again, searching for the human hemoglobin protein on this NCBI website. So these collection of 4 actions should be enough to be the algorithm for searching the human hemoglobin protein. Now, oftentimes we like to give our algorithms a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it search human hemoglobin protein. We often in computer science use camel case, so that's where you capitalize the beginning of each word and then don't have spaces. This is because computer scientists hate spaces. And you will see why more once we get more into programming. But they cause us all kinds of problems. So it's kind of just like a little quirk about us that if you're not familiar with, you may have to get used to. We often don't like spaces. Once we have the title in, we often will also, whoopsie, where did it go? Tab over the instructions that correspond to that algorithm. And so when we do that, you want to make sure they have the same level of indentation, because that means they all belong towards this algorithm up here called search human hemoglobin protein. All right, so the next one we have here is for shoveling snow from the driveway. So for this one, we have to think about, okay, how do we actually do this in real life? And there's multiple different ways that we could. Note that we won't be using a snowblower, unfortunately, because it's specifically asking us, how do we shovel snow from a driveway? So in this case, my brain is first going to, okay, if I had to shovel snow, A, I'd have to get over my grumpiness, but B, the first thing I would need to do here is get a shovel from the shed. Could be the garage, storage location, whatever it might be. But we need to actually go and obtain a shovel in order to do the shoveling. Then what we're going to do is start shoveling. And so that could sound really easy to a human, but say you are explaining it to a niece or a nephew or a kid, someone younger than you for the first time. How would you tell them what they need to do and when they would know that they were done? So we know that we're done when there's no more snow on the driveway, but what are we doing while there still is snow on the driveway? And this is where it's going to get into some of those repetitive actions that we have to do, which if you remember back from the textbook, kind of hints to us that maybe we want some kind of control statement. So let's just first start off if we were doing one shovel of the driveway. So what I would say is push the snow from one end of the driveway to the other end. So push snow from one end of driveway to the other end. Once we have that, we're at the end. You need to do that whole motion where you yeet the snow into the snowbank. Now, I want to really say eat the snow, but we're going to keep it profesh here. Throw the snow into the snow pile. Now, if these were just our instructions and that's all we had, this would get us one swipe down the driveway of snow removed. But we want to do that action of pushing the snow from one end of the driveway to the other end and then throwing it on the pile multiple times. So we need a way to indicate that we need to continue to do this until we reach that done state where there is no snow on the driveway. And so one of the mechanisms we can use is that control statement. And so we can use something called a while statement where we say while, and then we kind of have to flip it from the done state. So our done state is there's no snow on the driveway. So if we flip that for the control statement, that would mean while there is snow on the driveway, then we're going to push snow from one end of the driveway to the other end and yeet it into the snow pile. I mean, throw it, because we are professionals. Now, if you remember from the textbook, one thing we say is once we have, and there's a typo. Once we have a control statement, we need to indent all of the actions that we want repeated while there is that condition or that control statement still happening. So we want both of these conditions down here to be repeated. So we need to tab those over, and that's going to indicate to us just visually that both of these actions will be repeated until there is no snow on the driveway. So we're going to get a shovel from the shed. That's going to only happen once. Then we're going to look at the driveway. We're going to say, is there still snow on there? If the answer is yes, we're going to push that snow from one end to the other, yeet it into oblivion, and then we're going to look at the driveway again and say, is there still snow? If the answer is yes, we go and push more snow from one end to the other and yeet it into oblivion, and we look at it again. And we continue to do that until we get to the point that after we've thrown the snow onto the snow pile and we look at the driveway and ask ourselves, is there still snow on the driveway? We get to answer no. And once we get to answer no, we don't do these two actions anymore because they're not needed. So our control statement is just continuing and continuing and continuing. These two actions are happening while this condition is true or we're saying yes to it. As soon as we say no to it, we're done there. Now, one thing to think about here is, are we done with this algorithm? If you just did this and left your shovel out on the driveway, would your roommates, parents, siblings, partner, you name it, be happy with you? I can tell you for a matter of fact, my husband would not be happy with me. I would be getting the question, Kim, why did you leave that shovel out there in the middle of nowhere? We're going to run over it with our vehicles. So there is one more action that I would have to add in here that says put shovel back in shed to put it away. And you'll see that this indent is at the same as these beginning actions here and as the control statement here. And that's because we're not putting the shovel back in the shed every time there's snow on the driveway and we're repeating these two conditions. We're only putting it back in the shed once we can say there is no snow on the driveway. That means we skip those two things and we go right to this last action here. And so that's my algorithm for shoveling snow. And I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it shovel snow. I'll add a little colon to show that the actions after that are related to it. I'll tab everything over just to make it nice and pretty and easy to read. Again, that's my computer science bias though, but that gives us an idea of what that algorithm could look like. All right, for exercise 4, we have 3 cups and we want to write an algorithm to determine which cup is the heaviest. So again, we're probably going to need to do some sort of comparison or control statement. A very common way we can go about trying to figure out which thing is the heaviest. I actually have 3 dogs now. Things happen. Got a third Frenchie. And if I wanted to take all 3 of them and figure out which one was the heaviest, well, I'd probably take Vader and I'd take him to a scale and weigh him, and I'd take Rambo and take him to a scale and weigh him, and I'd take Louis, who's my new one, and take him to a scale and weigh him, and then I would just do pairwise comparisons. Who is heavier, Vader or Rambo? The answer being Vader. And then I would say, okay, once I know of those 2 who's heavier, then I just have to compare to the third. So who is heavier, Vader or Louis? And the answer is Vader. So I can do those kinds of pairwise comparisons to kind of pare things down a little bit in my instructions and make it easier. But say I didn't know at the time who was heavier, then we have to do some different things. So this is going to be quite a long algorithm. I'll try to keep it still readable over top of these things here. But at the very beginning, say we're going to weigh our cups. So we're going to weigh cup 1, weigh cup 2, and weigh cup 3. So each of those are different actions. And then we have to do some sort of comparison. And so again, we're going to want to use a control statement. We used the while control statement in the previous example, but for this one, we're not going to continue to do something until we are at a different condition. We just want to say, is this thing heavier than this other thing that we have over here? And a very common way we can do that with a control statement is something with an if statement. So it's very similar to our language. So for instance, with the dogs, I would say, if Vader is heavier than Rambo, then inside of that, I would compare Vader and Louis, and then I would output whoever was heavier out of that. Otherwise, we would do something else where we would have Rambo being the heaviest, and then I would compare Rambo and Louis, and then output the result at the end of that. So we're going to use our if statement. And we're going to say if cup 1's weight is greater than cup 2's weight, then we're going to indent over, because this is only something we do if we're saying yes to whatever that condition is. If we're saying, yeah, cup 1 is heavier, then we're going to check to see if cup 1 is heavier than cup 3. And we can do that again. Or we can, there's a bit of a different way they do it in the exercise solution, so I'll let you see that, and then you can see how my brain works for this. And then we could say if cup 1's weight is greater than cup 3's weight, and then we'll indent it again. This is something that we call nesting. We'll get into more details about it later. Then we're going to say cup 1 is heaviest, and then otherwise, whoa, and I go back. Why do I keep doing that? Where are we? Here, otherwise, say cup 3 is heaviest. So we have this whole statement in here that's saying, okay, we're taking 1 and 2, figuring out which one is heavier. Then we're taking, if it is 1, 1 and 3 to figure out which one's heaviest. It could be either 1 or it could be 3. I'm realizing now why we don't do it this way in the slides examples, because this is getting a little too advanced. I almost want to trash this and go back. But what I'll do is I'll keep this going through, and then I'll go through the simpler example on the other side afterwards. So up here we said if cup 1's weight is greater than cup 2. So if it isn't, then we would jump down to here. And again, if you don't follow this, this is okay. We will do a simpler example afterwards. Is greater than cup 3's weight. Wow. So if cup 1's weight is greater than cup 2's weight is not true. Check to see if cup 2's weight is bigger than cup 3's weight. Let me move this down and see if I can get all my printing. Here we go. And if it is, say cup 2 is heaviest. Otherwise, say cup 3 is heaviest. Now this is admittedly very confusing to follow if you don't have kind of a bit of a background in computer science. Let me go through the example that we give in the slides, which is a bit easier to follow. So this one is describing that example where I'm saying, oh, I'm taking the 2 dogs, weighing them, keeping whichever one is heavier, and then weighing it against the third. That's how you actually break it up into all of these different actions. Very confusing. Not so demure for an intro to computer science class when we haven't gone over nesting yet. Instead, what we could do is just take 2 of the cups to start with, and then just continue to keep the one that's heavier and just keep going down the list instead of having this kind of complicated control flow statement that we have here. Both of these will get you to the same answer, so we'll also kind of show different ways that you can approach the same problem and still get, say, 100% on the question or whatever it might be. So we'll say weigh cup 1 and weigh cup 2. If cup 1 is heavier, keep cup 1, else keep cup 2. And we'll call these and keep them as something that we're going to call, just to make it simpler for later on in the algorithm, as heaviest so far. Let me move this over so we can keep seeing it. Or keep cup 2 as heaviest so far. So that's like me saying, oh, I'm going to keep Vader and use him for the next comparison because he is the heaviest dog I have so far. Once we do that, then we're going to weigh cup 3. Oh, and we'll say if cup 3 is heavier than heaviest so far, move this over again, then cup 3, oh, here we go. Say cup 3 is the heaviest, otherwise say heaviest so far, which could either be cup 1 or cup 2, depending on what we found above, is the heaviest. Now I see one issue that I made in this algorithm here, other than it's hard to see. So let me get rid of some of these white spaces. I have a love for white space, so I usually add too much of it to my algorithms, which doesn't support my slides right now. But up here in this if control statement, I just have if cup 1 is heavier. We should really be explicit and say heavier than cup 2. So this side here might be a lot easier to follow than all the nonsense that is going on over here, which is okay. This is very much appropriate for the level that y'all are at in terms of programming and intro to computer science. The other example is one that we'll see maybe later on in class. We'll revisit it once we go over nesting, and you'll see why that would make sense. So I would say focus on this solution, not my crazy complicated solution I posted at the beginning, but also note that these would both get us the same information if we work all the way from the top, all the way to the bottom in terms of saying which cup is the heaviest. And also know that in a couple of these things, we have things like this where we're saying keep 1 as heaviest so far. Think about this. You'll see this coming up in future lectures, as things we call variables. It's just a way for us to kind of like store some information with a single name so that we don't have to repeat a whole bunch of instructions over and over again, depending on if we had cup 1 or cup 2 being selected as the heaviest. And the other thing I'll just mention before we move on here is that, remember, we're using these ifs and these elses or these otherwise. Else and otherwise are synonymous here. Else is actually the computer programming way of doing that, so you'll see that coming up. We can switch that to otherwise just to be consistent. But unlike the while statement, we just say if, then we evaluate this situation. If it's yes, we do whatever's indented. If it's no, we skip to the otherwise and we do what's indented under the otherwise. So unlike the while where we were just repeating anything that was indented until that situation was no longer a yes, it was a no, there was no more snow on the driveway. These things only happen once, so we don't go back up to them ever. We always just go through them when they're if statements. They get evaluated once, whereas the while statements will get evaluated repeatedly until some sort of condition is met. There we go. So those were examples of control statements. We also had some examples in the reading where we were using a while to tighten a bolt. So we had this algorithm called tighten bolt. We clamped our wrench to the bolt, and while the bolt was not tight, we rotated the wrench clockwise. Then once we rotated the wrench clockwise, we would then also evaluate again. We'd go back up to this well and say, is the bolt not tight? If that's true, if it is not tight, we're going to continue to rotate the wrench clockwise. Then we'll go back, is the bolt not tight? If that's a no, then we go to unclamp the wrench and put it away. So when this is no, and this is where it gets a little confusing because we can have lots of nots and yeses and nos and everything. So when the bolt is not tight, the reverse of that is when it's tight. So this would be a no when the bolt is tight. There's a couple of reminders here that we've already talked about. So the thing about the indentation, any actions that are indented under a while are going to get repeated every single time that while happens. And then there's also always going to be this condition here, or this constraint, in which we're evaluating it every single time after we've done the indented action to see if that situation has changed and we can move on from that while condition, or if we have to keep going. So there is a demo here. This is way better in person and also relies on all of us having a piece of paper. So, but we can recreate this over the videos, and I will tell you what is expected and what would be incorrect in terms of completing the actions. So we have this algorithm here, and it says, while the instructor's hand is up, write your name on a piece of paper. I'm going to say, instead of a piece of paper, if you don't have one, you could also open up like a word pad and just write your name in there on a new line every single time. So we're going to try doing this, and we'll see how far we get. So are we ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, now my human computers, you need to be evaluating. Is the instructor's hand up? In this case, it is yes. So while you're seeing this, you need to be writing either your name on that piece of paper or in your notepad. So you'll say, write your name. Once you've written your name once, you need to look back to the video and see, is the instructor's hand still up? Yes, it is. So write your name again and again and again and again. But every single time after you write your name, check back at the video to see, is Prof. Kim's hand still in the air? At some point, this hand will go down. Who knows when? We could be sitting here for hours. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't make you do that. The hand is now down. So what you should see on your piece of paper or in your word pad is your name written a whole bunch of different times. What you shouldn't see is your name written partially. So that very last time you wrote your name, what you need to do is, you're in the middle of an action. If the condition changes when you're in the middle of the action, you still have to finish that action before you go back and evaluate that condition. So even though my hand was eventually down, it doesn't matter if you were in the middle of writing your name, you finish writing your name completely, and then you go back and look up at the video and you say, is the hand still up? No, it's not. So I don't write my name again after this. You never ever stop in the middle of an action. The computer will always take these actions we're giving them as algorithms and do them completely, unless like the power went off or something like that. But that is a really weird use case that we don't need to think about in this class. So you're always saying, looking at the condition, is that true? Yes or no? If yes, let me do that action. Once I've done that action, look at that condition again. If it's true, I do that action again. And then I go back and look at that condition, and if it's not true, then I just stop. But I'm never stopping in the middle of my action, which is the very important key takeaway here. All right, so now we're going to move into some examples of algorithms. We want to identify the problem that it solves and identify some possible inputs and outputs. So I think we have 3 examples here. So here's the first algorithm. It says, for each student in classroom roster, we're going to call out student's name. If the student does not stand up, we will write an X by the student's name. So when I'm reading this, I'm looking at it, this is probably some kind of pseudocode. So if you'll remember from the textbook, we don't have to write algorithms in programming languages. We can write them in what we would call pseudocode, which is more similar to like our human language that we would use. And this looks like it's taking attendance in a class and putting X's beside any students' names who aren't in the class. So inputs to this problem, what could those be? Let your brain marinate, let it think about it for a second. We're going to need a classroom of students. This doesn't work if I'm just like yelling it into the abyss. I'd be putting X's by everybody's name and it wouldn't be actually solving the problem at hand, which is identifying what students are not in the class. So we need the class of students. We're going to need a class roster because we need that for our checking purposes. We could even go as far as saying we need some kind of writing utensil, whether that's a pen or something else like that. Given that we have this algorithm, if we ran through this as a short exercise, the output of this would be a piece of paper with all of the students' names and X's beside any students that were not in the class. The class of students is not an output because it's not changing throughout the algorithm. The writing utensil is not an output because it's not changing throughout the algorithm. The only thing that's changing is the state of the class roster because it's getting those X's added to anyone that is not in attendance. So that would be our output. Our next example here is a more biological example. So we have for each accession number on a gene list, go to GenBank and search for the accession number, then launch BLAST, then restrict the organism in the NR database to human, then blast the accession number in the specified database, add the top hit to another list, cross the gene off the gene list. And then we have to do that for every single gene that's on the list. So say we had 4 different genes, we're repeating all of those instructions from line 2 to line 7 for every single accession number that we have on that list. So the inputs to this are going to be, first we need to talk about what this problem is actually solving. So right now this problem is identifying the top blast hits for a list of accession numbers that we have. So this could be something that we do if we're looking for homology in a specific gene, different things like that. But the reality is that is what it's doing. Going through each of those things, doing the blast, getting that top hit, and putting it in a different list for us. So our input is going to be our gene list that we have with all of our accession numbers of it on it. You might want to say that we would need something like a computer to actually do those searching. That would be an okay answer for that as well. And then our output is going to be a new list where it has all the top hits. So it's not going to be the gene list. It's going to be the top hits. I would potentially take the gene list with the genes crossed off as one of the outputs as well, but we won't really do anything with that information. So yes, it has changed, but we don't really do anything with it. It's valid to say it is an output, so I would not ever dock marks for things like that because it's something that's actually changed as a result of our algorithm. It's just probably not something that's directly related to the problem that we're trying to solve here. It could be if we're also wanting to check to make sure we actually did something for every gene on the list. So it is very valid to think of that as an output as well. And then our last example we have here is an algorithm that says locate a signature line on paper, uncap the pen, write the name above the signature line, and then cap the pen. So this is likely an algorithm for signing some kind of document. What kind of document? We don't really know. It could be a contract of employment. It could be a loan application. What other things do we sign our names for? I'm trying to think when I signed my name on things recently. Oh, if we had to get like a medical procedure done or something like that, a consent form, those kinds of things. So we don't know exactly what the document is, but we know that is what we are doing. So it could be a solution that solves lots of different problems because it is more general. It could be applied to lots of different things, which is honestly something we often try to do with algorithms. In this instance here, our inputs are going to be some kind of document that we need to sign, as well as a pen. So we'll need both of those things in order to actually do this. And then the output of this is going to be a signed document. The pen doesn't change at all throughout. Maybe, I know somebody's probably sitting on the other side of the computer being like, but the ink level is lower. It doesn't change significantly throughout the algorithm. It's really the paper that is changing that is helping us show the output that we solved the problem. So the signed document is solving the problem that this algorithm is for, which is how to sign a document, like the steps that we would need to actually do that. Not all of these other things. So that's also a good way to think about it. It's usually going to be output something that changed and then something that's actually solving the problem. So those two things will help your brains kind of figure that out. If anyone has any questions about these things, feel free to post about it on the course website. And otherwise, enjoy this first little bit of coding. Try not to be too scared of it. Remember, and this was my aha moment for computer science that I'll share with you. Computers are incredibly stupid. Like, toddlers on steroids stupid. It's like you're trying to communicate to a toddler in a different language with an even more limited subset of language than what we have. So oftentimes when we're programming, you're going to get lots of errors. That's okay. That's just the computer having a hissy fit that it doesn't know what we're saying. And it doesn't know how to communicate very nicely to us that it doesn't know what we're saying. So it just throws errors at us and has hissy fits. That's fine. We can fix those things because we are much more intelligent than the computer, and we will help get it on the right track to doing what it wants. So just remember, as you're going through this learning about programming, yes, you'll see errors. Yes, that's expected. Teaching team is here to help. Either the TA or me, reach out. We're here to help. And it's not you. It's the stupid computer. All right, all. Happy coding.